What's a story you always wanted to tell on this sub, but nobody ever asked the right question? Story 1. I have a mutant power that destroys everything I touch eventually, the kind I don't want. The story begins when my mother was pregnant with me, and she got a huge static shock while reaching up to climb onto the sink. She didn't think much of it, but later on, as I grew up, things started to happen. Shop tills would suddenly malfunction, light bulbs would break, and I have gone through 12 laptops in my lifetime. In my adult life, I have broken 6 oven elements, 8 kettles, 2 TVs, and just last week, as I made Christmas dinner, the oven handle came off in my hand. Story 2. Whenever I ordered Jimmy John's for delivery, the drivers were either uptight or uninterested and wouldn't look at me, even though I try to be nice to service industry people. I finally realized that an old comment was still in the special instructions tab of my account that said, "Do not make eye contact at the door," which I must have made with my friends when we were drunk as a joke and forgotten. The past dozen orders or so all had that attached to the order ticket without me knowing. Story 3. My wife teaches kindergarten more or less. My son attends kindergarten at the same school. I brought them a tire, the size of a monster truck tire, to play with in their yard. Don't ask why. Weird idea, but they loved it. So we cleaned it up, scrubbed it, and I drilled holes in it so the water would drain when it rained. A few days ago, it was just me and my son. I asked him how his day was, and he said, "Blah blah fun, blah blah ate lunch, blah blah fun, blah blah. Xavier got his finger stuck in the tire, blah blah." So I asked him to back up, and he just repeated that his friend Xavier got his finger stuck in the tire in one of the holes we drilled for draining the water. I told him that sounded sad, and he said, "Yes, it was, and it rained." So I thought, poor kid. So I said, "Wow, poor kid. Did you get him a raincoat?" And he said, "No, Daddy, we didn't want to get near him because he pooped himself." So I was thinking, really poor kid. And I said, "Wow, really poor kid. Did the teachers help him?" And he said something like, "He was out there a long time." Then it devolved, and I really couldn't get any more information out of him. So I felt guilty about this kid because I had drilled the holes in the tire, but eventually it slipped my mind. My wife got home, we made dinner, etc., but I forgot about it until I was talking to her way after the kids had gone to bed. Then suddenly, it popped into my head. So I said to her, "So, our son told me one of the kids got his finger stuck in the tire today," and she just burst out laughing. I sat there dumbfounded. Then she explained to me Xavier isn't one of the kids. He's a teaching assistant who was supposed to take care of the delayed kids in the class, except his kid didn't show up, so he just played with the other students all day. Apparently, the 25-year-old guy was sitting on the tire and thought it was a smart idea to try to jam his finger into one of the holes, which makes it crazy. Thinking a little kid could get their finger in almost made sense, but for an adult finger, it's almost a miracle he could get it in without breaking a bone. Anyways, apparently he got his finger in there and couldn't pull it out, and they couldn't pick up or move the tire, and the guy was stuck out there for hours, and yes, it did rain, and yes, he really did poop himself. My wife said all the kids kept watching him out the window as it rained. Eventually, they called emergency, and she said she was gone at lunch when they arrived, but Xavier was gone when she got back, and the guy didn't come back to school that week. We still don't know how they got his finger out. Story 4. I was once hanging out outside a bar in a bad part of town. My friend and I were just waiting for an Uber when a group of sketchy freaks came up and started talking to us aggressively. We were 90% sure we were going to get robbed. I was just kinda over it. I had a bad day already. I just started making a string of jokes and conversation until the guys said, "This guy's weird," and left us alone. Story 5. I always knew my great-grandfather as the guy who lost his eye in an accident with a firecracker. This is Christmas. I found out that it saved his life twice. Once because he had tickets for the Titanic, which he then missed because of the accident, and the second time when he was supposed to fight in World War I. He went to the office where he was supposed to sign up for it, told them that he was disabled, which they did not believe. So he took his glass eye out of the socket and placed it in front of the officers. So yeah, losing an eye isn't the worst thing that could happen. Story 6. Oh God, it's a long story. It started when 4 boys, around 10 or 11 years old, would walk past my house every week to go swimming. For 4 weeks in a row, the same kid got pooped on by a massive crow outside my house. Obviously, we found this really funny, and didn't make the connection at the time that he must have done something to make the crow go off. I was putting bird food out in my garden, but I was getting loads of feral pigeons, so I tried to shoo them away, which this crazy crow must have taken offense to. Soon after, I noticed that I was getting cawed at by crows all the time. No matter where I went, there were angry crows cawing at me. That's when I Googled crows and saw that they can hold grudges, recognize people, and tell other crows about bad people. So I tried to make a peace offering by throwing food on my shed roof. My kitchen window, with the sink in front of it, overlooks the shed roof. After throwing food out, I stood by the window doing the dishes. This must have also made this crow go off. Later that day, a crow started absolutely screeching and cawing. I went to the kitchen to see what was going on when a huge bird poop landed on my window. In 20 years, there has been no bird poop on that window because there is a big ledge above it. So this crow must have hung its butt over the ledge just to do that. I went to bed that night only to be woken up at 5 a.m. by screaming right outside my bedroom window. I live on the first floor, so it couldn't have been a human. I googled crows screaming, and sure enough, that was the noise I heard. It had chosen the only window with a light on to do that. Later on that day, there was a big crow sitting on a tree near that window. If anyone else went to the window, it just stayed still. But if it saw me, it started bouncing on the branch like it thought it was funny. Obviously, after the pooping and screaming, I wasn't going to give it any food that day. I did give it food the next day, and it must have taken the hint because it never shat on my windows or woke me up by screaming again. However, for about a year and a half, every crow for a mile radius around my house would angrily caw at me. Don't make the crows angry. Story 7. My buddy and I went to the gym one night. It was a 24-hour gym, and since we're introverts, we liked going late at night when it wasn't busy. Nobody else was there that night. It was around 1 a.m. on a weekday. I finished my workout first and hit the showers. I was washing up in my little shower stall and minding my own business. Then all of a sudden, I felt cold water running down my back and my butt. That buddy of mine had filled up a bucket of freezing cold water, snuck up behind the stall with his eyes closed, obviously did not want to accidentally see me, put it over the stall door, and poured it. I screamed in terror because it was so cold, and he was laughing himself off. I decided to get him back. I was going to scare him. I finished my shower and overheard footsteps coming to the change room. The change area and the shower area were separated by a thin wall. I decided this was the moment. I ran to the change area in my towel and yelled. It wasn't my buddy. It was some random guy who had shown up for a late-night workout. I was mortified. I had startled this dude. My buddy was outside the locker room dying. We never saw that guy at that gym again, for a good reason. Story 8. I work as a housekeeper for the elderly. Once, I had a client who was 97 years old. She was the youngest of 14 children, had only one sister who was still alive, but lived in Canada. We live in the Netherlands. She had never been married, never had kids, and was extremely lonely. She lived in an apartment all the way at the end of the hall and couldn't walk to the entrance anymore, so she usually just sat inside. One of her hobbies had always been painting, but then she got arthritis and couldn't hold the brushes, so she stopped. She started reading to keep the loneliness at bay, but started going blind. I was usually the only person to visit her. I was there every week for 2 hours. We talked a lot. One time, it was nearly Christmas, 2011. She told me 2012 was going to be her last year. She was spot on and died on January 3rd. The same day she told me that, I was in her kitchen humming some kind of Christmas tune. Now, what you need to remember is that she was 97, pretty much blind, couldn't really walk anymore, etc. Suddenly, she said, "You couldn't hold a tone to save your life." I started laughing a little because she was so right, and she said, "Yes, there's nothing wrong with my ears." Guess it's more one of those stories where you had to be there, but still, one of my favorite work encounters in 15 years. Story 9. The most unexpected people I have ever met were under the least exciting circumstances. I was a janitor at a truck stop or big rig mechanic place where they worked on semi-trucks, RVs, tour buses, and more. Sometimes a mechanic was working late, and there'd be some Joe Blow trucker or Midwestern family waiting to get their vehicle back. One night, I turned a corner to see 6 Japanese men, all wearing black leather, studs, eyeliner, spiky hair, and all. They were the emoest guys I've ever seen. Of course, I was like, what the hell? But we got to talking, and I found out they were a Japanese heavy metal band called Deer in Grey. I had never heard of them. They were on tour and heading to Seattle when they had some issues with their bus while passing through my state, Idaho. They were so nice and encouraged me to look them up. I wished them a good tour and went about my work. It's one of my favorite memories. Totally bananas. Sweet boys. Story 10. The second one, I can't explain to this day. I was 17 at the time. I was lying in bed playing games on my phone when my door slightly opened. From my bed, you can clearly see the corridor no matter what, even if the door is almost closed. My parents weren't home, probably buying groceries or something like that. After playing for a bit, I got this weird feeling, a feeling that unfortunately I'm very familiar with. You know when you're alone but you can feel something staring at you? That restless feeling in your neck, back, and arms? You feel like something is waiting to meet your eyes. That feeling. At this point, since I'm used to it, I usually joke around and say things like, "Welcome," or "Hey, what's up, buddy?" But I didn't this time. I was almost paralyzed, so I just kept ignoring it. I got so anxious that I glanced at my door, and that was one of the worst mistakes of my life. I saw a huge old man with no feet, a bluish long coat, white hair, and beard walking from one side to the other. He was amazingly fast. Again, I was alone, 17, and I'd never seen someone like this in my whole life. I ran to the door and closed it as fast as I could, sobbing in terror. I didn't hear any noises and I didn't see his face. I just know that I called my parents and they came back to find me crying. There was no evidence of someone breaking in, nothing missing, and the front door of my apartment was completely locked. Story 11. Okay, so I was at this huge seafood buffet restaurant in Myrtle Beach and got seated next to a family of 4, a mom, a dad, and 2 kids. I went to fill up my plate with fried shrimp or something, and on my way back, I noticed the mom of the family was making really loud scraping noises with her knife and fork. I glanced over and saw that she was using the knife and fork to go to town on a big plate full of salad. The salad looked like it consisted of 3 ingredients: lettuce, cheddar cheese, and ranch dressing. She was absolutely grinding the salad to a pulp. I sat back down, ate my fried whatever, and the mom was still going to town. I couldn't resist glancing back over. Now she was working on another salad. Holy hell. The entire family had the exact same salad, and they were all waiting their turn for mom to turn it into a ranch smoothie. I went back for seconds, came back and ate, and the mom was still cutting and grinding in a booth across from me. It had been nearly 15 minutes, and honestly, I was getting full already from 2 plates. And this family here hadn't even started eating their salad. Who gets a giant plate full of salad anyway at these restaurants? I could see a little side plate salad to cleanse the palate in between gorging on fried oysters, but an entire family with identical salads is odd. I went back for some dessert crab legs. On my return, I noticed mom had gotten through all the salads. Each family member now had a huge grayish-green slurry in front of them. They were holding their hands and saying a prayer. Finally, they started slurping up their ranch gruel. I couldn't stop looking. It was like something from a horror movie. My mind raced with thoughts of these kids being kept in closets and fed ranch via straw through the crack in the door. Or worse, they were being fed poison, and ranch was the only thing that masked the taste. The room started to tilt. My stomach turned. This was a Lovecraftian nightmare. For a few very long seconds, I locked eyes with the mom. I felt my fist clench. Do I dare attack her here in plain sight, or do I lay in wait outside? Fight or flight? Check, please. Story 12. Ever since I was young, I've had vivid dreams. Sometimes I even experienced lucid dreaming, which I eventually learned to control. Sometimes I'd live for days, months, and as of recently, years in my dreams. When I was younger, I didn't understand this and would wake up disoriented, wondering when I'd wake up from this dream. I'd spend weeks questioning reality, which, looking back, also took its toll on my social development. Whenever that happens now, because I can dream up pretty much an entire life, I spend a bit less time disoriented, because I'm an adult that understands that they're only dreams. But I'll occasionally become depressed if I dream up an entire fulfilling life. And sometimes I dream that I've woken up, only to realize the alarm isn't shutting off and I'm still asleep, and I just keep waking up, pretty much trapped in a dream that only lasted 3 minutes and not hours. Story 13. I lost a fight with a lawnmower. I used to work at one of the most prestigious golf clubs in the city. That fateful morning, I was tasked with mowing the grass on a very steep hill. The only machinery we had that could do the job was a fly mower. These things had no wheels and floated over the grass. As this hill was so steep, we couldn't safely walk the mower up and down the hill. So, the standard procedure for this hill was to tie a rope around the handle for safety, and we could let gravity do the work as we pulled it back up the hill. If you've ever mowed grass in the morning, you know it can be wet with dew. That day was no exception, and the grass was wet and quite slick. I ended up slipping on the hill, and my foot got caught up as it shot under the lawnmower. I got the attention of the coworker working the area with me, and he helped me into our cart so we could race to the mechanical shop. Instead of racing, though, he proceeded to stop at each hole, waiting for the golfers to take their turn while I was in pain. Turns out, I was very lucky, and it was only my big toe that got injured. The doctor said I could have lost my toe. I didn't. Now, all staff at that particular golf course are required to wear steel-toe boots, thanks to me. Story 14. It was a rainy day in year 9, ages 13 to 14, and a few friends and I were stuck in a gazebo about 10 meters across at lunchtime because of the rain. Also seeking shelter, a group of year 10s and 11s entered the gazebo, occupying the east side of the structure. Naturally, a standoff developed as there were 2 distinct factions vying for control of the gazebo, mutually intolerant of each other. Everyone was standing sort of awkwardly, desiring the whole space. Then, the dispute escalated. Some of the year 10s started throwing water, squash, and other liquids at us in an attempt to evict us. And, being socially awkward, I suggested that I might throw my own liquids. This caused a strange reaction, and I realized that I could turn it to my advantage. Without thinking, I slowly began to unzip my fly. That raised a few laughs, and the chavs called me a good lad, shook my hand, and left almost instantly. It was an oddly proud moment, getting a handshake from someone I didn't know well or like for unzipping my fly in front of them. Still my most triumphant moment. Story 15. My dad, brother, and I took our Catamaran, a small 2-holed sailboat, out to one of the Florida Keys. We needed to cross under the 7-mile bridge to get to the beach where the rest of the family was. We had the clearance according to my dad, but apparently the tide was in. Our mast barely clipped the side of the bridge and started to capsize, but it settled and just sat there. We decided the best thing to do was to flip it the rest of the way and go with the current. We all had great life jackets and were solid swimmers, so we weren't worried about drowning. While we were trying to flip the Catamaran back over, it can be done, a Coast Guard cutter pulled up and got my brother and me on board. They tied the rope from the mast to the back of the boat and eventually got it up with the help of my dad. They wrote my dad a ticket, and we continued to the beach. My dad made us swear not to tell my mom. Well, that lasted about an hour because people had been fishing off of the old bridge and came to tell us at the beach that there were sharks circling us the entire time. I'm really glad I didn't know that at the time. Story 16. When I was in middle school, our math classroom had a window that had a perfect view of the side and part of the front of the school. One time, while I was in class, I saw the special needs kid hop the fence that surrounds the school and run. There were so many teachers after him. The police caught him and brought him back though. Funniest thing I've ever seen at that school.